All right, everyone, I think that we'll get started now. I want to apologize first by saying that you may hear some helicopters and whatnot. I decided that I wanted to host this meeting from outdoors in light of, if things were if this were a normal day, today would have been our commencement, and I'm sure that many of us would have been running around back here and trying to ensure that everything was ready for our students. And so I wanted to start by sharing that, and also by asking everyone to share some aloha by way of the Padlets that we put together for our graduating class. Every program has a link where we could add a little something in support of our class for 2020. I think it's a really big deal, and I know last time some folks were wearing hats, so I thought that it's fitting for me to wear my graduation cap on, given that today would have been our commencement ceremony. Um, that being said, I do want to take this time because this is the culmination of our spring semester, and for that matter, the culmination of our academic year. I want to recognize everyone for the effort and for the great semesters that we've had this academic year. In spite of everything that we've been living over this COVID-19 period, I think that we've adopted pretty well, and we've done the best that we could to help mitigate the challenges that we've been facing. There are probably more challenges to come and more decisions that will influence how our summer and our fall roll out and how our next academic year will look. But I think that is important to recognize that we are doing well, given the extraordinary circumstances. I have been reading not only the questions and comments that you guys have been sending out um, during these call for questions and invitations to these meetings, but also that recently we sent out a survey to the faculty as well as the students to get a sense of how the spring 2020 transition to online impacted folks. And we have comments on every side of the house. We've had comments on the faculty and student side suggesting that the transition wasn't such a hardship on certain classes, and we have some classes, some faculty and students that are really prone for the online environment. We also have some that have expressed challenges in the transition to online, and that was to be expected. It's important to note that we're taking these comments and these ideas into consideration as we look into rolling out what summer 2 and fall will look like for us. Um, Up until I want to say maybe an hour or two ago, there weren't that many updates to share, mainly because we know that a lot needs to happen, but right now we were just working those out. Not many decisions have been made because there are a lot of wrinkles to iron out. But there were a couple of UH announcements that came out and as to how we're addressing some of the challenges. And so I do want to take a couple of minutes to share a little bit of that and where we are and what we are doing, so that you get a sense that we are making some progress. It's not going to be as reactive as we were in earlier in the spring when COVID was just blowing out, because we have a little bit more time and we want to be very deliberate in how we make our rollout of the fall. You probably have heard or read through that the mayor did put out a safer at home until June 30th. So we've been following this for quite some time. We've been under the directive. Initially, we had one deadline of where we wanted to more or less stay at home whenever possible and work from home. And that slowly has been extended and extended. And we had one through May 31st. And then the governor and the mayors have been slowly opening up some of our services statewide. Recently, though, there was an announcement for the safer at home until June 30th. And this is not necessarily a reflection of there being so very many more COVID cases, or that we are declining in our health and safety situation, but rather that we're learning from our mistakes and probably learning from the mistakes of others. And by suggesting that there is a quick open, some other cities and states have seen an increase in cases. And so we don't want to move from staying at home to going partying. We want to have some type of transitional period where we don't put ourselves in a pickle too soon. There is some risk. There will always be some risk, like there is in the case of the flu, but we do want to control this as best as possible. So with that being said, there have been quite a few questions that have come in, not only from this last round of this Zoom meeting today, but previous meetings as well, where we have concerns over when are faculty and staff expected to be back on campus? How is fall going to roll out? Can we teach our classes online? What are the protocols that we're following for social distancing, our hygiene practices? And all of these are really important questions. In fact, they're so important that I don't have a deliberate answer for you today. Some of these have been evolving. I do want to say that in light of our fall 2020 semester, in that we are returning in some capacity some capacity of normal, we have been taking some steps to assess what our capacity really looks like. The current expectations as it relates to social distancing is that we keep a 6-foot distance between individuals, as well as wearing some type of facial covering. Some of these are easier to manage than others, but the reality still stands that it is difficult to put this in practice in our confined spaces. There have been concerns about recirculating air in our HVAC systems. There have been concerns about the frequency of cleaning of our spaces. There have been concerns about testing students, and what would happen if there was a COVID positive student and or one of us, what would happen in that situation. And so all of these are things that are being addressed to some extent, but we don't have definitive answers because it's one of like those moving targets. We've heard, I think it's in New Zealand, don't quote me on this one, but they went into a lesser level of social distancing where they're talking about 3 feet between individuals. And so we don't know where we'll be. All that we know is that the steps that the state of Hawaii has taken has put us in the lower incident rates per capita in the country, and that's a good place to be in. But that doesn't mean that we could be crazy and undo all of the hard work that we've put forward. As it relates to plans for reopening, we've never really said that we can't have folks come to campus if you're an employee or a student. We do want to reduce the frequency, and we want to stay in that zone a little bit longer as we continue to evaluate our protocols for coming back, and to ensure that we don't have some volume of folks that we can't manage here to ensure that social distancing. So for all of these questions and all of these considerations that we've been having, I've appointed an envisioning team. This envisioning team has representations from our various constituents, and the idea here is to have a coordinating body, a group of individuals that will help identify other subject matter experts, help identify folks that should be part of the decision making, coordinating what should be our top priority for the week versus what we could decide over the next 30 days versus 60 days, because we do have some decisions that we want to roll out as soon as possible so that we have a lesser impact on the greater community. And so I'll give us an example. If there are going to be any changes in our fall schedule where a class was originally scheduled to be face-to-face, and that class now may be shifted to some online class or a hybrid class or something different, we have to communicate with students and ensure that the registration process follows through. And so all of that takes time. And if we allow the enrollment cycle to continue going, it's just going to be so much more difficult to undo that registration and shift at a later time. It's also important for our anxiety levels. And I want to recognize that I've been getting, a lot of emails and comments, and I do sense the level of anxiety. I promise you that most of us, I think all of us, are facing the same anxiety levels, and I think everyone is looking for these answers to come a lot sooner than we're probably going to be able to provide. But the reality is that there are so many variables at play that we just need to evaluate them a little bit longer and have the right folks in the conversations. And so I'm sure that our envisioning team, what we did is that we subdivided our ideas into categories and created some other work groups. For instance, our facility work group, we're looking at how we could space out stations in the classrooms and get a sense of what the new capacity for the classroom is. So if in the past we used to be able to fit 25 or 30 students in a classroom, that number may look more like 10 or 12. And that's because we're trying to create these circles of 6 feet between individuals and whatnot. So that was one assessment that was going on with our facilities folks. They have other deliverables that are not as critical for today, but they will be critical before we reopen, which include how we're going to mitigate the cleaning cycles and whatnot. We have an instructional work group that is looking at what options we have available to us. And so I want to say that it is important for all of us to think not only about the delivery mode that we prefer or that we can manage as of today, but rather to consider the possibility if one of your students were to be COVID positive and we had to close your class and move it online, that we have to be ready. And so our instruction work group is looking at what tools would be necessary, maybe what professional development, what technology, and all of these variables. While we could come up with some really meaningful ideas on how to address all of the challenges, we don't know what we don't know. So for example, if we need technology of new cameras and microphones installed in the classrooms, the variables that we have, and you probably have experienced this, getting one of these little, headsets became really difficult earlier, like in March and late March, and now you could probably get your hands on some of them. So with all colleges and universities looking for ways of being creative and delivering instruction, some technology is going to be difficult to get our hands on. And then the second variable is getting it installed on time for fall rollout, as well as getting ourselves trained so that we don't have to troubleshoot in the middle of a class as much. And so all of these things are being considered. The different modalities, I know that I shared this at our last Zoom session, but there are varying options. There are the options, for instance, if we have two adjoining classrooms, it is possible to televise the class in one and be present in the other. That's an opportunity. The other opportunity is saying, okay, we have a class of 25 students, 12 of those students we could have in a classroom, and the remainder are going to be streaming live the same class. That's what they're calling the high flex model. And so these are all options that are being explored not only by our instruction work group, but by folks at the system, so that we could have that system-wide support and that we have somewhat of a similar experience. All of these conversations are currently happening. At a different layer, with your division chairs, you've probably been getting some messages. I'm going to take the burden and the hit over any confusing communications. And if there's any confusion, I want you guys to toss the blame at me. And it's because we're kind of hot and cold. One day we have this drive for doing something in some capacity, and then we have to pull back because we learned something else. And so we are assessing what classes could potentially go online. And I said this publicly before. We want to move quite a bit online because it allows us to better control what's happening on the campus. It will be very difficult for us to maintain all of the facilities clean to the extent necessary for the social distancing and the COVID-19 and CDC recommendations. if we have classes as normal. So we do want to move some online at the same time, and this is me talking out of both sides of my mouth. I keep saying that I'm turning into a good politician here. Is we want to move a lot online, but we also want to be we want to recognize that some of our students and some of our faculty thrive better in a typical classroom. And so we don't want to take that away. Some of you have expressed in the surveys that you feel that the SLOs haven't been weren't met in the same way that they would have in a typical classroom. And so getting all of this together, we have folks that want to come face to face, folks that want to maintain the online, and then folks that are willing to entertain the middle. I think that we'll get to operationalize something that looks more or less like that, but we're not able to capacity wise make a decision that allows us to flip everything on or off right now. We want to make sure that we have a big picture and then we operationalize those. At the system level, that's the expectation as well. They are evaluating to some modalities so that we have some level of consistency. And there are all so many variables and questions that are bubbling up as we're exploring all of these. So just I would ask for a little bit of patience in the delivery of outcomes, as well as understanding if the messages get hot and cold. Just because we're trying to keep everyone informed, but at the same time, it's becoming quite a bit of a challenge. We got quite a few questions on what we would be doing by way of coordinating, whether we'll be able to test students, whether we'll be having thermometers, whether we'll be having signage, whether we could have, I forget what it's called, but like the shields versus the masks for the faculty, just because it's easier for communicating purposes. All of these things are things that we're considering, and I'm not saying that I'm dumping this on the instruction work group because I don't mean to, but I think that it's a valuable tool as that work group is exploring what we do. There are other work groups that are also operating right now. We have a technology work group that is looking at things that can ease our transition. We have work groups that are looking at our public spaces, our student services. How are we going to manage that in the fall? Like I said, we want to be able to communicate out to our students and our community. Not that we're coming back in the fall like any other normal fall, but that we are coming back in some capacity for those that do need the services in a face-to-face capacity. So we'll have some of that. To what extent that's still being worked out, especially through the division chair channels, to evaluate what's going on. I also want to toss out there that I was in the last faculty senate meeting, and there was a set of recommendations for what our fall 2020 online classes or distance delivered classes would look like. This is a reflection of a couple of things. One of them is we don't know the type of allowances that we're going to get from ACC, JC, or any other accreditors on their expectations for online delivery versus correspondence delivery. This is usually something that we have to request approval before we move forward with. And so if we're moving forward with some type of distance delivery, we want to have a minimum set of expectations for the sake of clear communications. I will say this openly and pretty publicly. When I'm reviewing the student results of the surveys of how the spring 2020 transition affected them, some of the things that they're setting as recommendations is please the use of the grade books, frequent communication with the students, as well as periodic grading of the assignments. These are just some common things that came up in the surveys, and I'm going to eventually put those together in a way in which we could present it so that everyone has some access to this information. But those are some of the comments that were coming about. So it's a recognition that spring 2020 was weird, but if there is to be a continuity, these would be some things that would help address some of our more immediate challenges. Boy, that was a Ooh, yeah. So, boy, that's a good question. So, who are those involved in the teams? I can't regurgitate that, but at some point, and I'll tell you that we've been using some really nice Trello, I think, or Padlets, and some tools to get us coordinated in some capacity, including some of the membership. At some point over the next couple of days, I'll put something together to communicate out. I also want to be respectful of those that are in those work groups, because I'm sure that I don't necessarily want to say, okay, don't ask me the questions, you could toss it their way. I don't want that either. I think that we need to get them the information, but I don't want to overwhelm those that are participating. But we'll find a way of getting both the Envisioning Team membership out to you guys, as well as those that are currently part of these other work groups, and ways in which we could share some more information with them. So I didn't come prepared to name out people. I don't have it with me, but we will get you that information. Okay, that was a long-winded general set of comments. Okay, now I want to go through a couple of other more specific questions that came about. There have been questions about individuals that, and this has come up in multiple occasions, but individuals that may be at risk or higher risk in health, with their health weaknesses, or in any event. Initially, before we knew what we were doing in the fall, before that UH announcement, we had a mechanism always in place. If you are an at-risk individual, we could go through the accommodations. That's no longer something that's an expectation if you're moving your classes online. And so work with your division chairs for, they're the ones coordinating best to schedule, but we're not gonna force people that are at high risk to be on campus for their teaching. More will come on this, but we got quite a few questions revolving around that topic. As it relates to the expectations in the fall when it comes to students, faculty, staff, and the public, we don't yet have a position on whether the campus is going to be open to the public. Okay, we know that we're going to be back for ourselves and for the students. We don't have a current position on the public, and so that helps address some of the questions about hosting large events and whether things are going to, major performances or whatnot. We don't have a position yet. The other thing is that as of today, and this is again a moving target, we are still following the set recommendations on social distancing. And so we will be having signage everywhere that there are expectations that we all wear masks. I walk with them everywhere. In fact, on the way out from my office, we put a little sign that says, "Don't forget your mask," because we tend to forget often. So that is going to be it's currently an expectation for the fall that we wear them and that our students wear them. There's going to be expectations on keeping that social distance, right? And so the way we sit in a classroom is going to, we're going to set it up and coordinate it so that we maintain that social distancing. So whatever you've heard as it relates to expectations on the 6 foot and the facial coverings, that's currently an expectation for the fall. Not to say that may not change in days to come as we learn more. I got questions about the review of dossiers for tenure and promotion. These are conversations that are really happening with UPA work groups and whatnot, but we've always, or let me take that back. We've recently been piloting with an online environment for putting together these materials. It has been limited to a few individuals per campus, just to ensure that we have the resources and the support available. This is something that may be lifted in terms of it being restricted to only 5 per campus, as an example, and it may open up more. I do have concerns if, for instance, travel restrictions don't go away. How are we going to be able to review these dossiers if they're not already digital? And so these are questions that have come up and that we're trying to address. We can't make local decisions on many of these. These are decisions that are going to have to happen UH-wide, as well as in coordination with the different bargaining units. Yeah, I think I do want to recognize that I have gotten other comments that are not necessarily questions, and we're not hiding from those either. We are seeing what everyone else is doing. We've recently heard about California and their shift to more online. These are things that are really in the forefront of a lot of our conversations, but there are things that are still in conversation and no decisions. All that we know right now is that we are still working on the rollout for fall, where we're going to have some level of um, in-person environment. But I do want to throw in the caveat, and I hope that I don't forget to do this often. I hope it becomes like a broken record. But the idea that while we are trying to have some level of normal classes, we do have to prepare for possibilities of having to close the class and move it online. So those tools are going to be really important for us to move forward. At this point, I'll pause for questions. Yeah. So that I can't speak for President Lasner. There was a question. I don't know if you heard it from Kathleen, but oh, it is okay. So the questions are in the chat. Um, I can't speak for President Lasner. What I can tell you is that the expectation for some type of face-to-face or in-person return is that some will come back, but we all are also preparing for eventualities. We're also preparing for, and this is more at the local level. So each of the campuses know what our capacities are and what our spatial challenges are. So given that each of the campuses, we're creating our own work groups and deciding for ourselves what's going on. With the instruction work group, and what I think I have said in public before, I don't know anymore what I've shared in these Zoom meetings. But what I will say is that on a typical fall and spring, Leeward has about a quarter of our offerings already online. Okay, so we operate like that on a typical basis. I do want to shift to where we have a little bit more online so that we can manage the social distancing for anything else that's left. I also want to help recognize that there are disciplines and courses that require more of that face-to-face or in-person or in-classroom interaction because of facilities and the types of assessments. There are practicals, there's equipment-heavy classes, and some of these are going to be necessary to happen in the classroom, but we're still trying to shift it. If you recall, when we were first moving to this online environment over COVID-19, we were doing so more or less in phases, where we asked people, especially on the CTE side, can you divide and do like lectures on Zoom and then maybe go into the lab space for, the remainder. These are things that are still considerations because it'll help. So the lesser frequency that we have folks on campus, the lesser the chances of there being some, contamination or instance where the social distance isn't really playing isn't working out. My optimism is really that, and this is not a secret, maybe it was a secret, but I want to share it. I do the groceries for my home. And so I'm the one that goes to the Walmarts and the Sam's Clubs and all of that stuff. And I have seen at times areas where I'm like, okay, there's tape on the floor, they're not being followed. There's definitely more than enough people in a space that, takes away some level of comfort, especially when you're chasing after something like um, all-purpose flour. um, and so I've been chasing after these myself, and I've been seeing some of the crowds. The optimism that I'm presenting today is that we've slowly began opening, and we haven't really experienced an increase in COVID positive folks. And maybe really optimistic on my end, but I think that we are almost in that position where it's not as frequent that we're seeing it, and we're already kind of intermingling a little bit more. And so I'm hopeful that we don't have major clashes there. But I do want to say that our facilities folks, I mean, I've seen some pictures of how they've tried to coordinate some spaces. we have also asked for, especially in classrooms, not offices, but in classrooms, if personal items could be removed in some spaces, because the less stuff that we have in the classroom, the easier it is to manage the social distancing and the easier it is to manage the cleaning. There have been some ideas tossed out, and again, this is something that's happening at the system level as well. If you go to supermarkets right now, some of them, and it runs out, but they'll have some hand sanitizer and some wipes, maybe to help for like self-serve. You clean the spaces that you're occupying. That may be an opportunity for how we help manage. But what I'm asking is that we keep our we stay open-minded, acknowledging that if we could prep a little bit more for an eventuality that can happen later in the fall, that I hope that we do that now, so that for our sake, as well as that of our students, we can maintain that safe environment, and that we're able to transition in a way in which we're a little more prepared to deliver that instruction and ensure that those SLOs are met. And so that just means, if at all possible, remaining connected. I'm going to pause for a second. I don't know if the helicopter is coming out. So just keeping that open mind will remain really important as we roll out information and opportunities for workshops and or professional development, that we engage in these, because we just want to be ready. We want to be ready so that we're not caught on another, I forget which day it was, like a March 13th or something, March 12th, when the announcements began rolling out and we had to make all of our transitions. So I'll take another pause if there are more questions. I can't really see the chat box on my screen. For summer? Okay, so the question was, can we clarify for our students' sake what's happening for the summer? So as of right now, all of summer one is online. The one variable that I don't have an answer for us right now, but I think that we need to get at, is whether as instructors we're opting to have synchronous or asynchronous instruction. That becomes really relevant. I think that I will toss this over to Kay and the division chairs and the deans to help address. I think that we need to do an assessment of whether these online classes will be synchronous or not. What I can tell you is that this is an observation that it's not just Leeward, but UH-wide. A lot of the scheduling does not necessarily articulate whether an online class is still going to be delivered in a synchronous capacity. And so we're looking for some common language that we could use whenever the classes are scheduled, so that students can see what they're committing for. So for summer one, they're all online. What I can't answer is whether they're synchronous or not. For summer session two, we are still operating on an online environment. However, we are submitting some courses as a pilot for a soft rollout to face-to-face, and this is probably going to be, I don't know which classes these are. I know that there may be a handful or fewer, and likely on the CTE side, where there is that expectation for the equipment or the lab spaces, or it may be in the sciences where there's lab sciences. And so we're going to have, if at all, a handful of classes that are going to be face-to-face. And so I think that the communication with the students is really important. I'm glad that whomever mentioned it. We'll take a shot at crafting a message that goes to the students, clarifying what their expectations are for the summer. And we definitely know that that needs to happen for the fall, but we want to make sure that we cook the fall a little bit more before we send out those communications. No other questions? Last call for questions. All right, as you think of the questions, if any more come up, just know that we're still reviewing these links where you're sending the concerns. Know also that I am taking these concerns and I'm categorizing them and sending them to the different work groups. I will be sharing more details on what the Envisioning team is doing and what the work groups are doing to help us get through this fall rollout. um, I want to, again, it's easy for us to trip up over the communications. I do it myself. I promise you, there are some things that come out from different offices, and not just here at Leeward but everywhere, that trip us up because we may be thinking in one direction, and just before the communication comes down to us, it opens up publicly. So there are, and I've said this along the ways, there's so much that we're trying to manage right now that we're likely to drop balls. So I apologize in advance for that. But I want to recognize that I feel that everyone has really worked diligently and that we've done an amazing job at getting through the spring semester. We are celebrating our students. They are making it through. We are still challenged on the enrollment side, so anything that you could do to nudge your students to enroll for summer and fall, that's really instrumental. Um, but we are coping with a lot of curveballs that are thrown our way. And this goes, in support of everyone that is managing anything from scheduling to resources to even just communications. It's a lot to juggle and a lot to put together. I'm grateful for everyone that has really worked to make this an amazing year in spite of all of the challenges. This really concludes my first academic year, and I've had an amazing experience. I think I have an amazing set of colleagues that I work with. I don't know that I could say this anywhere else that I've worked, that I felt that support along the ways. Like, we get comments on we should be more responsible on what we are doing given the COVID-19 outbreaks. We also get a lot of comments on, how well we have managed the process so far, or that at the very least coped through the spring semester. So um, I'm humbly grateful for everything that everyone has done. I want to thank you for for an amazing academic year. I'm really hopeful for what we could do moving forward. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's going to be hard. We're all going to have some bruises, but I think that we'll all make it together. And I want to recognize that outside of the fact that a priority for us is the health and safety of us and our community, we also have our mission. And right now, our communities really need us given the unemployment rates, the challenges in filling some workforce fields. And so this is the time where we will shine. I know that we have the expertise here to put together whatever is necessary to help our students. And right now, again, is lending a hand and working with our mission in ensuring that our community gets what they need to get out of the hole that we are in right now. So thank you so much. I appreciate you all. I hope to see you really soon. I want to nudge everyone again. We have Padlets for our students and their graduating class. We have been posting some really nice messages. It's kind of like one of our only ways. I know that others could be more creative, especially the smaller campuses, on how to address their graduations. We are just really big, and it's difficult to maintain the social distancing and do anything creative. But the Padlets, I feel, are a really nice and fancy way of us sharing our aloha with our graduating class. Please post announcements there. We're going to be blasting those. And I just really look forward to the time when I could see you all walking around here and, sharing aloha. So thank you all. We will continue these calls and everyone will get an invite. So it's not the last call. It just happens to be the last call for the semester. Thank you all. Appreciate you all, and keep working with your teams to getting us through.